Hi everyone and welcome back. In this next video, we're going to dive into the topic of digestion. We will begin this lesson by reviewing outcomes, which begin with knowing the significance of the gut tube or the alimentary tract. We also want to understand the process of food intake from the point of intake through to the elimination phase of digestion. Part of this lesson includes being able to generally describe enzyme actions that are also seen as part of digestion. And lastly, we will look at some of the neurological controls of digestion. One of the primary functions of the gastrointestinal or alimentary tract is to provide the body with nutrients, and chewing food makes the food particles that we eat smaller, but increases the surface area of the food at the same time. This then increases the contact area for the digestive enzymes, which will mix with food particles and become part of digestion. Once chewed food reaches the stomach, it mixes these digestive enzymes with hydrochloric acid. Functions of the digestive system include ingestion when we eat food, and the oral cavity allows food to enter the digestive tract and is broken down by mastication or chewing, and the resulting food or bolus is then swallowed. At that point, digestion has two descriptions, either mechanical or chemical. With mechanical digestion, we look at the muscular movement of the digestive tract, mainly in the oral cavity and the stomach, where we're breaking down food physically into smaller particles. But chemical digestion involves the process called hydrolysis. And hydrolysis reactions are aided by these enzymes that are mainly in the stomach and small intestine, and they chemically break down food particles into nutrient molecules small enough to be absorbed and used. The next function is secretion, and this involves enzymes and digestive fluids or juices that are secreted by the digestive tract itself, and its accessory organs facilitate chemical digestion further. With absorption, we see the passage of those end products of digestion, and the nutrients as a result of chemical digestion are then dumped into the blood and lymph for distribution to different tissues and cells. In terms of organization, the digestive system is broken down or divided into two main groups. First is the gastrointestinal tract itself, or the GI tract, and its accessory structures. The GI tract itself is a continuous tube that extends through the ventral cavity of the torso and includes the point of intake or ingestion all the way through to the other end of elimination. The accessory structures include the teeth and the tongue and the salivary glands of the oral cavity, as well as the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. Although we have to consider the actions of the stomach and small intestines, they are more likely to be categorized or lumped in with the muscular movements of the GI tract, where we look at the actions of peristalsis, and these are wave-like movements that occur from the oropharynx all the way through to the point of elimination, which allow the GI tract to push food particles through. The action of mixing in the oral cavity and also in the stomach then allows the GI tract to repeatedly break down food into smaller and smaller particles using the process of mechanical digestion. The process of digestion is heavily influenced by neural system controls, and the first being that parasympathetic nerves can stimulate GI tract activities while sympathetic nerves act to inhibit GI tract activities. Hormones derived from endocrine functions and glands in the body and from even the GI tract itself help to regulate GI tract activities further. In some regions of the GI tract, especially the stomach and small intestine, we see the clever use of reflexes to stimulate some actions while inhibiting others concurrently. In the mouth or oral cavity, we begin the process of digestion, whereby food will enter the GI tract by ingestion, and food is then broken down by mechanical digestion using mastication. One chemical digestive process occurs where enzymes in saliva break down polysaccharide into disaccharides. So there is a chemical manipulation of chewed food occurring right away in the mouth. The tongue, which is made up of skeletal muscle, manipulates the food during mastication, and it also contains, of course, taste buds to help us sense or detect the taste of the food that we're eating. Food particles are then mixed with saliva during mastication, resulting in a moist lump called a bolus for easier passage into the pharynx. Mechanical aspects of digestion start with chewing actions and, most important, teeth, which appear to be adapted specifically for mechanical digestion or mastication within the oral cavity. This includes canines for tearing, premolars for crushing, and molars for grinding. Muscles of the jaw and tongue will work together then to move food and then swallow what's taken into the oral cavity. And these muscles are known to be very strong in tensile strength. Biomechanically, the jaw acts as a lever, but maybe not the most efficient type. If you're interested in biomechanics, the muscles of the jaw represent an interesting example of function and form, being very specific and altered to simply make us chew and swallow. 3 pairs of salivary glands called the parotid, submandibular, and sublingual gland secrete most of the saliva into the oral cavity using salivary ducts. Saliva then helps moisten the food during mastication and dissolves the food into forming a bolus and helps cleanse the teeth. Saliva is made up of 99.5% water, and the remaining 0.5% is dissolved substances, including amylase enzymes for chemically digesting carbohydrate, bicarbonate, and electrolytes. The stomach is a pouch-like organ that's primarily designed for food storage, generally 2 to 4 hours, whereby some mechanical and chemical digestion also occurs. Food is regulated at both ends of this pouch or stomach, and what goes in leaves at a rate determined by many factors, such as type of food and available space in parts upcoming later in the GI tract. The stomach is divided into 4 regions: the cardiac stomach, the fundic stomach, the body of the stomach, and the pyloric stomach. The stomach is also known for having some really unique yet thick folds in its innermost layer called gastric rugae, and these are there to increase the surface area of the stomach for expansion, secretion, digestion, and of course more absorption. Now within the stomach we see chief cells, and these cells secrete pepsinogen, which is an inactive enzyme. Some parietal cells are also present, and these are responsible for secreting hydrochloric acid and the intrinsic factor, which also aids in absorption in another part of the digestive process in the intestine. We also see mucus cells within the stomach, and these cells are there to secrete mucus and alkaline substances to help neutralize hydrochloric acid within the gastric juice environment. Then we have to look at the function of the G cells, which secrete a hormone called gastrin, and this hormone is known to stimulate the parietal cells and overall gastric secretion. In terms of macronutrient digestion, we see that carbohydrate digestion is continued at this phase with gastric amylase, resulting in disaccharides. Protein digestion begins with pepsin, resulting in peptides. And lipid digestion begins with gastric lipases, which can only break down certain lipids such as butterfat, resulting in fatty acids. Absorption into the stomach is limited, where only small and fat-soluble substances can be absorbed, so water, alcohol, aspirin, and certain drugs are able to be absorbed into the stomach. And the result of all of this mixing and chemical digestion, secretion, and absorption is a yellow paste called chyme, which we will be passing on through to the small intestine next. The regulation of gastric secretion and actions or activities is done both by nervous system and hormonal mechanisms, and food moving along the oral cavity in the esophagus stimulates parasympathetic nerves to activate the secretion in gastric glands, and the gastric hormone from G cells in turn stimulates the gastric glands for more activities, and this is what we call a positive feedback loop. On the other hand, when food is emptying from the stomach, sympathetic nerves inhibit the gastric glands from working and impede or inhibit gastric actions in general. And a hormone called intestinal gastrin, which is released by the small intestine, further inhibits other gastric activities or actions. And the above regulations of digestion occur in 3 overlapping phases: the cephalic phase, the gastric phase, and the intestinal phase. In the cephalic phase, this involves special senses that detect food and uses parasympathetic nerves and the vagus nerve to stimulate gastric action or activities. So the sight, smell, and taste of food can cause stimulation of the vagus nuclei in our brain, which in turn will then stimulate acid secretion. From there, we also see direct stimulation of parietal cells and the stimulation of gastrin secretion to help or aid in digestion. Another phase of digestion that we're going to look a little closer at is the intestinal phase. And you won't need to memorize all that you're seeing in the phase graphic that's before you, but it's shown so that you have a sense of all that's going on in the GI tube to facilitate digestion. So this intestinal phase involves an acidic chyme being passed into the small intestine, which has been chewed and processed all the way through to the stomach at this point, which then secretes intestinal gastrin hormone to inhibit gastric actions. However, there's also some neural inhibition of gastric emptying and acid secretion, and the arrival of chyme in the duodenum causes distension and an increase in osmotic pressure. These stimuli activate a neural reflex that inhibits gastric activity when combined together. In response to fat still present in chyme, the duodenum section of the small intestine secretes a hormone, secretin, inhibiting gastric acid secretion. The enterogastric reflex is a reflex that begins in the small intestine and ends in the stomach. Once the duodenum fills with chyme, sensory stretch receptors are stimulated and sensory nerve impulses travel to the central nervous system. Nerve impulses from the central nervous system and the vagus then inhibit peristalsis in the actions occurring at the stomach wall. Now we move on to talk about the pancreas, which is a highly evolved and specialized gland. And the pancreas has both exocrine and endocrine functions, and we will focus on the exocrine functions devoted to the secretion of digestive enzymes, ions, and water into the intestine of the gastrointestinal tract. The digestive enzymes are necessary for converting a meal into molecules that can be absorbed across the surface lining of the GI tract into the body. By now we know that there are several digestive enzymes secreted by our salivary glands and our stomach and surface epithelial layers in the GI tract that also contribute to digestion of the foods we consume. However, the exocrine functions of the pancreas are necessary for most of the digestion of a meal, and without it there's substantial loss of digestion that results in malnutrition. So there are some specialized actions that occur in the pancreas, and there are several hormones and enzymes secreted by the pancreas, and this allows the pH levels to balance themselves out after being exposed to hydrochloric acid in the stomach. Pancreatic amylase is produced and secreted into the small intestine and completes the process of hydrolysis, which is, again, reviewing the breakdown of starch carbohydrates to smaller branched chains of glucose. Intestinal tissue does not really respond well to a highly acidic environment, and if digestive processes are not working properly at this stage, ulcerations or ulcers as we know them can result. The functions of the liver are really important in carbohydrate metabolism because hepatic or liver cells carry out what's called glycogenesis, which is the conversion of glucose into glycogen, and glycogenolysis, which is breaking down glycogen to make glucose. The liver is also critical in lipid metabolism, as it's where hepatic cells produce bile for emulsifying fat and to oxidize fatty acids, synthesize various forms of lipids, and convert glucose to fatty acid. Other functions of the liver include storage of glycogen, iron, and vitamins A, D, and B12. And we also know that the liver can detoxify harmful substances in the blood, and it also serves as a blood reservoir, containing about 7% of all total blood volume. The gallbladder is a small sac located on the inferior outer surface of the liver, and it stores and concentrates bile secreted by the liver for use later on. Regulation of bile released into the GI tract involves a feedback loop and begins with chyme, with fat, and enters into the small intestine. This results in the release of a signaling hormone to make the wall of the gallbladder contract. Bile then passes down the ducting system on through to the duodenum. The small intestine is a long tube with a small diameter, about 1 inch across, extending from the pyloric end of the stomach to the ileocecal valve. The small intestine is divided into 3 parts: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Secretions from the small intestine include glands that release a watery fluid that lacks any digestive enzymes but still provides a vehicle for moving chyme to the villi surface of the interior surface within the GI tube. Some other intestinal enzymes include maltase, which will digest maltose into glucose, sucrose, which will digest sucrose into glucose and fructose, lactose, which digests sucrose into glucose, along with several other enzymes working together in the small intestine. And these digestive enzymes are embedded in the surfaces of microvilli. They act to split molecules of sugars, proteins, and fats that we consume. Each villi contains blood capillaries to be able to absorb water, glucose, amino acids, vitamins and minerals, and short-chain fatty acids, and also contains lymphatic capillaries called lacteals to absorb long-chain fatty acids. Water is absorbed by the process known as osmosis, whereas fatty acids are absorbed by diffusion since they are fat-soluble. The last segment of the GI tract, the large intestine, is different in a few ways. There's different absorption occurring in what's also called collectively the colon, and in this structure, bile salts, water, and electrolytes are all being processed in what will be the final digestive process. Some major divisions of the large intestine include the cecum, the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, and the sigmoid colon. The large intestine has little or no digestive function, although it does secrete mucus. Its mucosa has no villi or microvilli, but contains numerous goblet cells for secreting mucus to aid in the formation of waste material and to maintain an alkaline environment. Mechanical stimulation and parasympathetic impulses control the rate of mucus secretion. The large intestine only absorbs water, electrolytes, and some vitamins. A lot of bacteria is also present in the large intestine where they break down certain indigestible substances and synthesize some vitamins. Now we will wrap up by discussing how basic energy requirements are required by the body and come from the process of digestion. In this way, our food intake directly impacts not only how we operate at a baseline level, but when added activity increases these demands for energy. So we now need to consider how we make the energy required for human movement. We're really only adding another step in this process and making it part of a system, and it's one that gives us both energy and the ability to work. This type of mechanical energy uses hydrolysis of ATP molecules to provide this energy. The roots of this important molecule come from our food intake, and then by being converted to ATP. There are 6 basic forms of energy: chemical, electrical, heat, light, mechanical, and nuclear. But none of the energy processes would occur without the actions of the sun. So solar energy actually helps to allow for life to exist by creating energy for plants that produce carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. These macronutrients in turn support both human and animal life, and once digested by humans, consumed nutrients are then translated to reusable sources of immediate energy.